Chapter 4. As I expected, breakfast the next morning was incredibly uncomfortable. Mother, Falzar, and I hardly said a word. We just ate quietly at the table, which was somehow put back together again. How? Was the first thing I asked when I came down from the loft and sat at it.
I had to move all the pieces outside the cabin realm and use magic to bind them all back together again.
Mother swallowed a spoonful of gulak stew.
Then I had to carry the whole thing back inside, and believe me, it's a lot heavier than it looks, especially because of my bad back.
Oh, I hadn't even known she had a bad back. She'd never mentioned that to me before. Or Falzar, as far as I knew. I wondered how she got it, but now was definitely not the time to ask. Poor Mother.
It took all last evening, too. I was terribly sore and tired when the whole ordeal was finally finished, and I was incredibly lucky there didn't happen to be any shadriths lurking around while I did it either. Extremely risky and dangerous. But it had to be done now, didn't it?
She shot me a glare that would have made Lord Sycorath himself wither until he looked like a 100-year-old apple. Yes, I'm sorry, Mother. Very, very sorry. She grunted. As I ate from my bowl of gulak stew, I couldn't ignore the burning question I had any longer. Mother? She looked up at me from her stew, eyes still sharp and narrowed.
Yes?
I swallowed hard, let my gaze wander to the small square windows framing the cabin door behind her. Well, you've always told me the cabin realm doesn't have a magic current, so, I guess what I'm asking is, how was I able to activate the magical weapon in the first place if it's impossible to even use magic here? So I guess what I'm asking is, how was I able to activate the magical weapon in the first place if it's impossible to even use magic here? Both she and Falzar stared at me, their expressions blank. Mother of Gulak Scat, I shouldn't have asked. I really shouldn't have. Then Mother blinked rapidly a few times, her face paling a couple of shades. Finally, she said in a voice a bit like a shadrith's predatory hiss,
You deliberately disobey me and completely demolish the kitchen table with the magical weapon? And you have the audacity to ask me such a pesky, nonsensical question, young lady. Well, I'm not going to dignify it with an answer. You've made it perfectly clear you're incapable of being trusted with the magical weapon or anything pertinent to your future. At least not yet. So, for the time being, I'm not going to tell you anything more about it.
And with that, she went back to eating, silence filling the table except for Falzar's usual loud slurps as he ate. They seemed a little extra loud this time, though, probably out of discomfort. As for me, a barrage of chills whipped down my spine. Yikes. Well, that had certainly been strange and unnerving, though I guessed I couldn't blame her. All this really was my fault, after all. When we all finished, she left the cabin to go hunting again, and I stayed at the table, idly swishing my spoon through the thick brown stew. Even though I hadn't eaten either lunch or dinner yesterday, I wasn't very hungry this morning. Falzar was still finishing up his soup, his tiny red snout stuffed in his bowl. As he did, I couldn't help but glance at the cabinet the magical weapon lay in, even though it hurt both my eyes and soul to do it. Oh! Falzar looked up from his bowl, brown stew coating his snout. He'd always been a bit of a messy eater.
What is it?
The cabinet. It looks as though Mother locked it up yesterday, or maybe this morning. A small, round metal object was lodged midway along the cabinet's handle, part of it wrapped around the handle.
Yes, it looks like she did, and a good thing, too. Now you can't hurt her, or anybody or anything anymore.
Ouch. It was like Falzar just struck his claws right into my heart and raked them around. Yes, it was going to take a long time for me to get over this whole horrible magical weapon thing. There was no doubt about it. And for Mother to trust me again. Seriously, what a complete and utter fool I'd been. No, looks like I can't. But I learned my lesson, Falzar, really, I did.
Good.
He stuck his snout back into his bowl, more loud slurps filling the room. But as I sat there, continuing to stew over the whole awful thing, something still wasn't sitting quite right with me about it. Sure, Mother was extremely upset because I disobeyed her and activated the weapon, and sure, because of that she refused to answer my question about it, but that didn't change the fact that what happened was something she said would never happen. Ever. It was supposed to be impossible to use the weapon in the cabin, which meant Mother had to have been lying, perhaps even from the very beginning. I mean, there was simply no other explanation. I mentioned that to Falzar, and he removed his snout from his bowl again, his whole body going rigid.
Mara, I don't like where you're going with this. Of course Mother wasn't lying. She wouldn't lie to you. She's just very upset, that's all, and for good reason if you ask me.
Then how else do you explain how I activated the weapon?
Well,
He scrunched up his whole face like he sometimes did when he was thinking extremely hard, his eyes shrinking to tiny slits.
Gah! I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation, like I said before. You're just too young and immature to know what it is yet, like Mother basically just said.
I let that roll around in my head as my gaze wandered back to the cabinet. No, I don't think that's the case. What happened with the magical weapon? It wasn't supposed to happen. Ever. She has to be lying, or at least wrong about something. Very, very wrong. And if she's lying or wrong, then I can't help but wonder what else she's been lying or is wrong about. And all this time as well. Falzar gave his wings a particularly sharp flap.
Mara, that's enough of that talk. Really.
I glanced toward the cabin windows, taking in the green and gold of the line of trees marked with X's just beyond the yard. I headed toward the door.
Mara, what are you doing?
I strode out of the cabin, towards the edge of the property.
Mara, get back here this instant!
Falzar must have been flying along behind me, as his voice followed me as I went.
I mean it, young lady. Where do you think you're going?
I'm going to see what's beyond the cabin realm. I'm just going to take a peek, see if what Mother said is really out there, and see if there's anybody else living nearby, anybody who could be my friend. But I didn't say that last part. It sounded too sad, too pathetic in a way, though I didn't know why exactly. Falzar soared in front of me, hovering a few inches away from my face.
Mara, don't be an utter fool again. That is an absolutely horrific idea. Of course Mother's been telling the truth. Of course she isn't wrong about what's beyond the cabin realm. Plus, it's incredibly dangerous out there, and...
But once again, I turned him out as I pushed past the first line of trees.